actually think, I've been thinking about this, like, so next year now is to, I love it, because it's back to when it was before COVID, actually.
No, there's a few. Like, there used to be like 5 or 6 here, yes, all the time.
But 3 is pretty good. You know, somebody
better than 0.
Did you ever get the eye looking machine? You know what? And to right now, somebody who's interested in that AGI, and if I can meet them casually,
there's a meetup there. It's like 2 branches on like 6th Street. They had like sort of like a Japanese meetup at 5. Tried it?
The relationship is not on money. Did you ever get well, not that one. Whatever. Those things are great. I recently became interested again about the resonance again. What? Trying to do something. Do you know some AI thing? I think you're right. No, everybody is doing. Yeah, I've actually spoken to some other people who know better make it worse. I see folks who is just maybe just have to go out for a second. Has a very different idea of intelligence. And so his view, the first thing about to master AI in natural language is language needs to be totally scientifically and mathematically defined. Every word has to be mathematically defined. That's his approach. And that's a road to nowhere. I mean, natural language has these properties which is like big words. You can't shoot when you can't say, you know, bank means it's not hard. I mean, Psych tried to do something like that. So I think he has a very different idea, and also he's very much a lone wolf. You know, he just wants to solve the problem. Come up with a theory of everything. So I don't think he'd be interested in funding.
Not in the intersection.
Stephen
road or synonymous. Yeah, what's the difference? Intersection is like 4-way. We're still
we have raised 10 million to your smaller dreams that people something I don't know what they got right your eyes. Who could write a check for 5 million and then his buddies get focused. I mean, like with Peter Thiel, could write into Deep Mind. Suddenly everybody wanted a piece of the expert. Come to our 600 half of which had only been hired like 2 months before. So it's possible, you know, you have to kind of get to the right person. And obviously, they need to trust you, know, what you're doing has a chance of success. Yeah, and then of course Meta. You know, they it's a woman big data, open AI, they're not talking about we're going to need better nuclear power, we're going to need fusion power to power things. We're talking about this guy. We're using 20 watts here, you know. Something very wrong with it. DeepMind, it's actually, there are many startups. There's he's one of the founders. Another co-founder is Shane Lake, and Shane actually used to work around 2002. So they just got together and Emmy's just really smart guy. He hit it off with Peter Thiel, about chess, just over dinner, they hit it off. They've done a tremendous breakthrough.
I would trust that with my life. Right.
Yeah, even if it doesn't break it,
Next time, come up with a
you would trust your life with it.
Yeah, they should. Yeah.
What do you find the fun from?
As compared to effort.
Google search, a woman in her.
What do you think? Does AI understand how
He actually says that the approach that they take will not understand to AGI.
Well, if it does, it would be general
And yet,
intelligence.
the company's mission is to solve intelligence. So they really want to know how to solve
You
intelligence.
started this by saying,
Which is what it said. Consider how many smart people they hired.
what's going on.
I think they're looking under the wrong
And
tree.
well, it couldn't understand the outcome possible. And it did both of those.
Find out.
And that's what it does.
Not too bad.
First one, second one.
This is the second one.
Yeah, that is the first one. Yeah.
I do have a recording.
This is the first one here.
Yeah, no, they also, I mean, they just, make the venue available, have live streaming, right? So we'll have it every month. Always second Thursday of the month. I saw 12. Hopefully we'll get some other students will otherwise. I have a different topic of consciousness and free will. Whatever.
But I think what's crucial here,
Chain of
part of it is
chain of thought process that I guess it's one direction to go with that. So now we're like decompose. Is that because I've watched your videos, so I know what your approach to AGI is. Do you think that's like generally considered moving in the same direction as what you're doing?
Not at all. Yeah, pretty much.
But I think that's fair. We're good at
I know you have.
Come back up or afterwards? How long are you? Well, depending how long this session will
Testing. All right, the microphone is working. And I think we can actually get started. Yeah, please make yourselves comfortable, and I think my presentation will take about half an hour. If something doesn't make sense and you really want to ask me to elaborate a bit or clarify, please do interrupt. But obviously I'd like to get through it and, us not get totally sidetracked on it, but, just use your discretion. So thank you very much for coming here. It's, with short notice, and hopefully we can build a bit of a community of people interested in this topic and explore it a lot more. So I will spend quite a bit of time talking about what AGI is, because I think to evaluate what a reasonable approach to AGI is, you really have to have a good understanding of what you're trying to achieve. So these are the topics I'll talk about. What is AGI? 3 waves of AI, which I think is a useful way of carving up the AI space. why we don't have AGI yet, and then look at LLMs, the limitations of LLMs, and whether we think they can be overcome to achieve AGI. So let me start off by saying is, what AGI is, it's bigger than electricity, fire, electricity, internet. I mean, I can't remember who gave this particular quote, but that seems to be the consensus for people really understanding what AGI is. It's a really, really big deal. Now, we have Sam Altman, who just recently said, oh, we'll have AGI soon, and it's not really going to be a big deal. Clearly, he's not talking about AGI. So it's really quite messy, that to the extent that I actually on my Facebook page, I had to call it real AGI. Because, you know, the term has been abused so much where people use it for marketing. Actually, there's kind of an interesting story about Sam Altman and OpenAI. Apparently, and I believe this to be true, they have their agreement with Microsoft is such that when the board of OpenAI decides that they have achieved AGI, then their deal with Microsoft is off. That basically they're saying when, and this was negotiated, you know, a couple of years ago, because they're saying when we have AGI, this is so potentially so dangerous and so on, and you know we can't guarantee that we will continue providing that. But the interesting thing is the board of OpenAI will decide when they've achieved AGI. I mean, crazy times, you know. Anyway, so this is not AGI if it's going to happen soon and not have a big impact, believe me. So let's talk about what I believe AGI, you know, how we should see it, how we should imagine it. AGI is essentially when we have machines that can think, learn, and reason the way humans do. And, you know, for example, we can now train one AGI, for example, to be a cancer researcher. And when I say we train, it would largely train itself because it can hit the books, you know, like a human. It can learn to be a cancer researcher. So you have a AI cancer researcher. You can now make 1 million copies of that cancer researcher. And you have 1 million cancer researchers chipping away at the problem. We're obviously going to make some serious progress with that. And especially seeing they're going to be able to communicate with each other much better. They're not going to have egos get in the way, and they're going to be more rational, have photographic memory, you know, instantaneous access to information on the internet. So it's kind of a big deal. Now you take that in any field of scientific study, whether it's, you know, better batteries or pollution, or governance for that matter. So it's a big deal. The second area is a massive reduction of cost of goods and services, because certainly pretty much any desk-bound job, the cost of that can drop, you know, tremendously. So there's this radical abundance of cost of goods and services going down. The third area, which I personally think is, I'm very, very excited about, of us getting there and being able to do that, is what I call a personal assistant. Now, the reason I give 3 personals here is personal in 3 different meanings of the word. Personal in that you own it. It serves your agenda, not some mega corporations. The second personal is that it's hyper-personalized to you. So it learns your goals, your history, you know, who you interact with, and helps you with your goals. So it's hyper-personalized to you. You're not a demographic, you know, you're not a statistic. You're an individual, and it learns that. And the third personal is the one of privacy, that you decide what it shares with who. You know, certain things you share with your spouse, others with your co-workers, and some things you share with Amazon. So that personal assistant, I think, can really help us become better people, help us work through issues and problems, and help us in many ways. So it's a little bit like having a little angel on your shoulder, you know, that can help guide you. So those are the kind of things that, to me, automatically have to happen if we achieve AGI. you know. So it's huge. So, you know, here's a more formal description: a computer system that matches or exceeds the real-time cognitive, not physical, abilities of a smart, well-educated human. And, you know, well, I've already spoken about that. So one of the interesting things is what I call my theory of the Helen Hawking theory of AGI. And what I mean by that is Alan Keller and Stephen Hawking. You don't need to have a lot of sense acuity or a lot of dexterity to be really smart and to be able to do a lot of things in the world. So robotics is really hard, and, you know, having general sense acuity like humans have is a hard problem that I don't believe you need to solve initially. In fact, your AGI can help you solve those problems. So let's talk a little bit more what is unique in human intelligence, or what's important in human intelligence. So if we look at intelligence as being a set of knowledge and skills, kind of one way of carving it out. The really important part is those skills that allow you to learn. So if you could build an AI that has learning skills, so that little section there on the right, that will allow you to acquire really any amount of knowledge and skills that are appropriate within the capacity of the system. But it's really, that's the problem that has to be solved. So another way of looking at it is intelligence is not about having knowledge and skills. Intelligence is about the ability to acquire knowledge and skills. And that's often misunderstood. Many people think that if somebody has a lot of knowledge, they are smart. And some of the IQ tests actually are knowledge-based, which is, you know, makes them not that appropriate. There's another interesting way to look at it, and that's the difference between narrow AI, or AI that has been engineered to do a certain thing. And pretty much all the work in AI nowadays falls into that category. There's a human that engineers a system specifically to solve a problem. Now, a perfect example there would be IBM's Deep Blue machine, the world chess champion. You know, it didn't learn how to play chess. It doesn't think about playing chess. It was the ingenuity of the engineers to build certain algorithms using computer power to basically play a good game of chess. So it's not building a system that has intelligence, it can learn these things, but rather that it's engineered. Also, the knowledge tends to be fixed. It's not adaptive. It cannot improve its knowledge over time, as opposed to having an adaptive system. So ultimately, what you want in AGI on the two axes here, adaptive, that it can adapt to changing circumstances and adapt to acquiring new knowledge and skills. Also being able to transfer knowledge that it has in one domain to another domain. And the other thing is that it's autonomous, that it can learn autonomously, can act autonomously. You don't need a human in the loop. So these are some of the characteristics of AGI. So DARPA, a few years ago, DARPA came out with this presentation where they talk about the 3 waves of AI, and it's actually pretty useful. So the first wave is what we now call good old-fashioned AI. So that are really logic-based systems, rule-based systems, and, you know, all the stuff that was done in the early days of AI. Early days of AI, well, really up to 2000 or so. Then the second wave hit us like a tsunami when people figured out how they could use massive amounts of data and massive amounts of computing power to do useful things. So that neural networks basically suddenly became useful, which prior to that they hadn't really been particularly useful. So that's the era we're in now, is the second wave of AI. It's all about big data, big compute, statistical systems, and now, of course, generative systems. The third wave of AI, according to DARPA, is really looking at it from a perspective of what does intelligence require. And what I've been talking about in AGI is a system that is adaptive, that is flexible. And that is what they call the third wave. Now, the cognitive architectures or cognitive AI are really the method to achieve that. And it's a very different approach because, again, it doesn't focus on having a lot of knowledge and skills. It focuses on how do you have the core ability, the core technology to be able to acquire knowledge and skills in real time and in a conceptual way. So just to elaborate on that, what cognitive AI is, so adaptive, real-time, conceptual learning. That's really concept formation is probably the single key difference between animal intelligence and human intelligence. Obviously through evolution and that, we evolved from animals and we have a lot of the same machinery. But what makes humans different is that we can form concepts on top of concepts on top of concepts. So many layers of abstraction. So it's the ability to form abstract concepts, very abstract concepts that really makes human intelligence different. And we can have very abstract concepts such as honor and things like that. Another related thing to that is metacognition, or what Daniel Kahneman calls system 2 thinking. So that's the ability to think about our thinking, to monitor our thinking, to know what we're talking about, and that is in stark contrast to LLMs that really don't know what they're saying. There isn't that monitoring system that kind of knows what the system is doing or thinking. So that again is something unique to humans to have metacognition. So here's a chart, and I'll share that. I don't think we need to spend the time here going through every point, but there really is a huge difference between statistical generative AI and cognitive AI. And you really, I believe, you can't get from the one to the other. You really have to start from scratch. Now, the remaining part of the talk is actually going to be, can LLMs be tweaked to achieve the requirements of AGI? But there is a huge difference in what you expect and how you go about it. So before I talk about LLMs, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about why I believe we don't have AGI yet. Now, obviously, by even asking the question, there's an assumption built in that potentially we could already have AGI. Now, ChatGPT has actually kind of done us a favor in that sense, that it's given us a taste of AGI. It almost feels like it has human level intelligence in many ways. I mean, I was blown away by what ChatGPT can do, and I think pretty much everybody in the AI field was blown away. I mean, even the people working on it, that, hey, you scale this thing up, and wow, suddenly you can have these conversations that can write poems for you, summaries, and I mean, it is amazing. It truly is amazing. I think nobody expected that. But it gives you some kind of idea that current hardware technology clearly can get pretty close to, producing something that seems very close to human intelligence. And I think also everybody knows it's a very inefficient way of going about it right now. So I think it's not unreasonable to say that maybe if we'd taken a different path, we could have AGI already. I certainly believe that to be true. So the first problem is almost nobody is working on AGI directly. And you know, that's for a number of reasons. But if you actually scratch a little bit under the surface of people claiming to be working on AGI, you actually find almost nobody is. They might be working on some particular sub-problem that they think can lead to AGI, or they're working on some commercial product that has something to do with AGI. I mean, if we look at the company, the AGI, well, I guess two AGI companies. If we look at DeepMind, they are not working on AGI, even though that is their mission. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but they themselves admit that they don't have a path to AGI. So if they don't have a path to AGI, if you don't, whether the path turns out to be right or wrong, but if you don't actually have a path to AGI, then you're just, you know, doing research or fiddling about or doing something else that you happen to be able to do. And of course, that's a big problem with companies that have a lot of money, have a lot of data, have a lot of computing power. That's the hammer they've got, so everything tends to look like a nail. You know, so we can just have more cleverer algorithms, you know, throw more computing power, more data at it, then hopefully we'll solve it. So really, realistically, very, very few people in the world are actually working on it. And, you know, the reason is clearly because statistical AI has been so tremendously successful in so many areas that it sucked the oxygen out of the air. And I can actually give you an anecdote from my own experience. We had a brilliant intern from Germany work for us quite a few years ago. And he really understood our cognitive AI approach, and everything was great. But he went back to Germany to do his PhD, to finish his studies. He couldn't get a sponsor for cognitive AI at all. So he ended up doing his PhD on statistical, and he's now lost to the world, So, you basically, you can't get a sponsor for a PhD, probably can't get your papers published even, you're not going to get funding. If you want to earn the big bucks, it's all in statistical AI, and it has been for a long time. So commercial, financial, academic pressures strongly favor narrow AI. That's something I alluded to as well. Investors, publishers, academics, they want results now. They want to see, can you beat that benchmark? So all the focus is on, hey, we're going to do whatever it takes to beat that benchmark. Whether it has anything to do with AGI or not, whether it gets us closer, in many cases it gets us further away. But that's the motivation for academics, and for anybody who has funding, there's obviously always a strong motivation of, we want to see results. And in the case of DeepMind, for example, it could be, you've got to be better than OpenAI. There's that competition, but it's really just a competition between them. Can we master Go, AlphaGo? Phenomenal achievement, but nothing to do with AGI, but it gives them prestige, and they're doing something, they're achieving something. So there is this tremendous pressure to get results now, to beat benchmarks or to have some commercial product. So the next point is related to the oxygen that's been sucked over the air, is the people that have influence in the field of AI, people running the companies, funding them, and so on, their backgrounds are typically statistics, mathematics, logic, not cognitive psychology. They speak a completely different language. If you talk to them about cognition and how cognition works, or epistemology, theory of knowledge, any of those things, that's not the way they think about the problem. They think about it as statistics, mathematics, logic. So I don't believe you can solve the problem unless you start from understanding intelligence, what intelligence is and what intelligence entails, which means having a pretty good understanding of how the mind works, because that's what you're basically trying to build, an artificial mind. So if that's not your starting point, if your starting point is we have a lot of data, we have a lot of computing power, or we've got to do theorem proving or something like that. You're very unlikely to build human-like intelligence. Very sad, I find that, you know, we've spoken to a number of people with deep pockets or influential people, and what often strikes me is their lack of vision. And, you know, of course, a lot of rich people are rich not because they have necessarily good global vision. They may have a good vision in a particular area that they made money in, or they've been lucky, you know, or combination of those things. But I find it quite sad that quite often people with a lot of money, the best thing they can think of is to give it to Stanford, or, you know, give it to African dictators. I lived in Africa for a long time, and it's really sad of how the money is not just wasted, but how it's seriously counterproductive, because the money that is sent there, almost all of it, just props up dictators, and it's really sad. And so, you know, I find it quite sad that people with deep pockets often don't have the vision of what how AGI could benefit humanity. Of course, last point here is it's not unreasonable that people may not like AGI. You know, they may think they may be fearful of it, or, you know, whatever the motivation may be. They may think we don't want humanity to go that way. There is famous AI researcher, I can't think of his name now, Gödel Escherbach, author? Hofstadter, yeah, Doug Hofstadter. A hero of mine in terms of the work he's done in AI. And I met him at a conference and I started talking about AGI. This is like 20 years ago. And he said, no, I don't want AGI. I don't want my children to grow up in that kind of world. And in fact, he's become a lot more vocal about that recently. It's not necessarily an unreasonable fear to have, you know, that's not that unknown life, you know, that what AGI will bring. That's not what you want to let your children or your grandchildren grow up in. So it's certainly not unreasonable. Of course, skepticism, you know, a lot of people simply believe a computer cannot reach human-level AI, or certainly not anytime soon, but a lot of people actually believe it can not, you know, it'll never have that. So that percentage of people believing that is rapidly decreasing. Okay, so I already mentioned, you know, the narrow AI trap. Just have a sort of graph there. If you want to achieve AGI, you just have to focus on that, you know. And I've had 4 AI companies now, 2 development companies or R&D development companies, and 2 commercial companies. And my development companies always turned into commercial companies and turned into narrow AI, because then by hook or by crook, you basically make the system do what it needs to do to work commercially. And it's not the same thing that you need to do to get to this kind of flexible, adaptive, real-time learning. You know, that requires a lot more. So I'm happy to say, though, that the current company, we've now just launched a product on our 3rd generation of purely focusing on AGI. So I've known about the AGI trap for 20 years, and I've fallen into it with my eyes open, but I believe I'm now in a position to avoid it. So this, I think, is also kind of a good way of representing it. So LLMs have massive amounts of knowledge and skills. I mean, trillions of pieces of information are in the model. It's huge what they know. They know a lot more than any human does. I mean, many orders of magnitude more any human does. And, you know, some associated skills to that. But what you really need for AGI is you need that real-time, adaptive, autonomous, conceptual learning and reasoning. And they are just not good at that. And so, to me, it's a road to nowhere. It doesn't matter how many power stations you build or how many fancy GPUs you buy. It's not going to get you to AGI. All right, but now let me turn that around and say, well, maybe, what if I'm wrong? And of course, I hope I will get some good feedback and criticism to this talk that other people will say and say, hey, but you missed this or you missed that, because I would love to get AGI via LLMs. It's much easier to get funding that way. And, you know, I could step on the shoulders of all of the zillions that have already been spent on it. So, however, the scientific consensus, if you actually talk to people in the field, there's a general agreement that big data GPT approaches will not lead to AGI, and I have to put real here because of Sam Altman and comments like that. So there is actually a pretty strong consensus that we need something else, something very different. Many people believe, in addition to LLMs, some kind of a hybrid system. But anyway, that's not enough. And here we have two quotes, and I said earlier on that Demis Hassabis, in spite of all the work they've done and 600 PhD level researchers that they've had for 10 years, he says deep learning is amazing technology, but definitely not enough to solve AI, not by a long shot. Pretty strong statement from him. So let me give a high level, a quick overview of which is kind of interesting that the name GPT already tells a lot about the problems. It's generative. It makes up stuff. From the trillions pieces of information, it was trained on good, bad, and ugly. And it can pick the good and the bad and the ugly sort of statistically to cobble something together that seems sensible, and it often is very adamant that what it's telling you is true. Secondly, it's pre-trained. So it's a read-only model. The model cannot learn in real time. Now, people will try to dispute that, and I'll talk more about that, but the model cannot change in real time. It cannot learn by interacting with the real world. So imagine you hire a personal assistant, a human personal assistant, and they come work for you, and you tell them, oh, we have this new product line here, and these are the detailed product line, and we closed down this branch, and we have a new business relationship with this company, and so on. The next day, your personal assistant comes in, and they don't know any of that, or it's not, or the implications of it. It might be stored in some separate database or so, but the model of the core model has not been changed, updated. And the T, transformer, is really the core enabling technology. And, transformers really a game changer in what they managed to do and as an enabling technology. But they are inherently a form of backpropagation, which means they have to be trained in bulk. There's no way around that. There's no known incremental backprop algorithm that can be used there. So the inherent limitations, hallucinations, unpredictable, needs a human in the loop, which is not ultimately something you want if you have an autonomous system. Just spoke about that. If you try to retrain the system, it's well known that in neural networks you can get catastrophic forgetting. So you can partially retrain a system to try and give it additional knowledge, but you don't know what it's going to forget. So again, you have this huge reliability problem, and that's something that's well known in neural networks. Black box, not auditable, not safe. That's a big limitation that you really can't. It's very difficult to look inside it. Limited understanding. spoke about that earlier. And they are actually very, very expensive, not just to train, but they're actually also very expensive to run. And I think commercial companies are starting to figure that out, that to actually get them to do useful things is not cheap. So it's not necessarily cheaper than using other methods or humans. I'll give one example in terms of the commercial limitations. The field, my company in the commercial side is we replace call center agents. So, for example, one of our big clients is 1-800-Flowers group of companies, Harry and David and Popcorn Factory and so on. And of course it's now a Valentine's Day next week, and so they go from 300 agents to 3,000 or 6,000. And with our system, we can actually provide the customer service, very robust customer service. But you need to be able to very accurately follow all the business rules that they have, which are very complex, in terms of what product, what area are they in, how late is the product, how was it shipped, can you give a discount, can you reship it, updating their back-end system with the information reliably. You can't have a statistical system that is 90% accurate. By the time you've taken 5 steps, you're down at 30% accuracy. I mean, it needs to be 100% accurate, pretty much. And talking to a lot of companies.
In your
yes?
defense, though, what are the call center reps' accuracy rate? They're not at 100% either, right? I mean,
yeah,
they're probably. I mean, in this time.
Yes, of course, but it also depends how catastrophic the errors are. Yeah. Like, I don't know how many of you read the article where a Chevrolet dealer put in a ChatGPT chatbot, and it sold the car for $1. Somebody said, can you sell me the car for $1? And the chat says yes, and the person followed up and say, are you sure this is legally binding? And the chatbot said yes. So a lot of egg on their face.
Yeah. But one of the things I would just point out there is just like, when you're looking at, is it replacing a human? A call center rep doesn't achieve probably, from an audit perspective, more than, 60 or 80% optimal outcome, right?
Yes, well, in fact, that's a good point.
And I'm sure you're going to tell us your system does better than that, right?
Correct, and that's a very good point. I mean, it's I think we all experience how bad computer systems or automated systems, service systems are typically. You get to the bank or the airline, and most of them, you get into IVR hell. You get into hell, and you just press 0 to get to an operator. But it doesn't have to be that way. A well-engineered system that actually has memory, has the ability to deeply understand and so on, is better than human service, because you don't have to wait for half an hour, and it's going to give you consistent service. Yes?
The only trouble with these computers, and I'm a computer programmer, is that, at least with a human, you can make them feel guilty and transfer you to their supervisor. Wait a minute, hold on. You can transfer to a supervisor who may actually speak, cogent English, and you can escalate as long as you're talking to a human. You can escalate. With these systems, I don't know. Is there a button you can press?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
this machine is an idiot.
I mean, I'm very strong on on our customers giving the corporations we deal with, giving the user the option. I mean, on our system, at any time you can say, I want to talk to a human, I want to talk to an operator, and it'll transfer you. And it'll transfer you with all the information that's already gathered, unlike the normal human. I have to transfer you, and then you have to tell the whole story from the beginning. So, really, the sort of the detour here I wanted to do is to say, from a practical point of view, we are actually hearing from large enterprise companies that have tried to implement LLMs. And they find they're very expensive to implement, and they're actually very limited, and for the kind of limitations you're seeing here. So they're not, there's a lot more hype in terms of, oh, they'll replace all the humans, and they'll be able to, like programming as well. I use it. It doesn't double my efficiency in programming. You know, I mean, it helps here and there, but then occasionally it gives me the wrong answer, and then I spend 3 times or 10 times as much time figuring out it gave me the wrong answer, you know, debugging it. So maybe for certain programming tasks, you know, these assistants can help, but for the kind of heavy-duty programming and architecture, so forget it. I mean, it just doesn't really help anything. Okay, now let's turn this around. Let's say, you know, what can we do with LLMs? Can we overcome these problems? So hallucinations, fine-tuning, parameter tuning, tweaking. So if you turn on the temperature, then it tends to be less random. That tends to reduce hallucinations. Data curation, now that's very expensive. I don't know how you can curate data when you have 1 trillion pieces of information. It's really hard to, you know, to do that. But maybe there are some semi-automated methods one could use that you could cross-check information before you put it into your model. It seems, you know, stuff can be done there. So external validation that you can, you know, cross-check with other sources, even other LLMs. And if you run 3 of them and 2 of them agree, then if they were trained on different data sets or different technology, you know, presumably you can improve the accuracy. Also, something intriguing that doesn't seem impossible is to have, and I think some people are starting to work on that, is to have some external system that somehow monitors how the system is performing. There was a recent article where, not directly related to this, but where they found patterns of when the system is speaking the truth and when it's lying. And apparently they could see detect different patterns. I'm pretty skeptical as to how generalizable that was. Often these papers get published and can't be replicated, but perhaps, you know, perhaps there are ways of externally monitoring and improving that. So real-time learning, there are really 2 methods that I'm aware of that people are trying to use to overcome the problem that can't learn. And the one is to have external databases, which, you know, gives you robust knowledge, provided that the system does the right query, that it interprets your question correctly. Then it'll basically just hit an external database, which can be, you know, completely accurate. And that database can be updated with up-to-date information of product availability or whatever. So it can give you accurate information. But again, as I said earlier, it does not update the core model. You know, it really, you're really using the model as a natural language interface to an external database. Just in a, you know, very, very flexible way. The other approach is having a huge context window that you could basically just keep building the context window and you know, have your whole life's history basically in the context window. Now, there are problems with that, and we actually did some tests, benchmarks, which I published in a white paper, where we used Claude 2, which with a very large context, 100,000 tokens or something, whatever, was large enough for our test. And what we found is it gets confused as to what is in that context window. So they're actually finding that it tends to focus more on things you said first and things you said last. But also, again, it doesn't integrate it, it doesn't change, it doesn't update your model. So it can change the context, but it doesn't do that in some kind of integrated way. You know, it doesn't form new concepts or something. It's just you're giving it all of that context every time you ask something new. You're forcing it to digest everything you've said before. So I don't know of other methods that people have to try and get real-time learning. I've not seen any papers that even remotely attempt to update the model itself in real time. And so I don't even see how that's possible. But if you could do that, then that would certainly open the door to AGI potentially.
How about the fine-tuning
So the fine tuning is really a method of restricting or molding, I would say, what kind of output it gives. So it reprograms the output layer of the large language model. And that's really also how they get them to behave better, basically, you know, but it doesn't change the core model itself. It's just the output layer that it will encourage certain kinds of outputs and inhibit other kinds of outputs.
Well, on the image, well, the language side, I haven't seen what fine-tuning on the language side is like, but on the image side, those QLoRa things that are like 2 or 3K or whatever that somehow stack on top of the model, like you said,
Yeah.
to the output, there are things like a particular person. So it's like, it's almost more like a concept in the terminology
Yeah.
than it is a filter for
Yeah.
like an overall filter.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd need to look into that. I'm not aware of how that works.
Yeah,
So.
that's how they work. Like you can say an anime character so and so, particular one
Mhm.
is what that QLoRa file is for.
Right.
And you basically have the checkpoint file, which is a 2
Yeah.
to 8 gig thing, and you have like several K, like a few K
Mhm.
that you just stack on top of it,
Mhm.
and it's part of the same inferencing run.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like it's kind of reformatting the output in a certain way. But
But in theory, like, it's this person's face that you're adding in. So, like, you can actually train it on your face or
Mhm.
your friend's face,
Mhm.
and you add the QLoRA that's their face QLoRA.
Mhm.
And when you say, generate a picture of a cat next to Frank,
Mhm.
it will actually have a picture, like, it'll use the general model
Yeah.
stuff for the person, but it'll have Frank's face.
Mhm. Yeah. I'll need to look into it. I don't know how that works on image.
QLoRA is able to use it.
Mhm. Good. Yeah, black box, people are struggling with that, trying to pinpoint different places of what they mean, you know, trying to find the grandmother neuron, you know, whatever, you know, what the particular nodes in the network represent. But it's just really, really hard to make sense of that. I mean, first of all, some of the things really don't express it. It would be obviously it's a distributed encoding, so there might be hundreds of neurons that actually represent a certain entity or thing. So to try and make sense of that seems pretty hopeless. And then the last item is how can expense be mitigated? And I think, you know, an order or two of magnitude seems doable. I mean, definitely there's a lot of motivation to make that happen, and people are coming up with very clever kind of ways of making the system more efficient and now building custom hardware to do it. But I think we're still a long, long way from, you know, the 20 watts that our brain have use. And the interesting thing here is that cognitive AI, our approach that we have, of course, doesn't have the trillions pieces of information that it has, but it doesn't really need it. It is much, much more energy efficient. I mean, we can train the system on a 5-year-old laptop, you know. And okay, we're not at the same scale, but there's no reason to believe that this, you know, it's nowhere near the $100 million to train ChatGPT. You know, it's a completely different approach because you are training incrementally. You don't have to keep plowing through the trillions of pieces of information over and over and over again. So yes, it can be mitigated to some extent, but you know, there still seem to be some serious limitations that remain. And certainly, you know, I'd love to hear from any other points that I may have missed that may have fundamentally changed the picture, but it doesn't seem to me that LLMs really have any hope of getting to AGI. So, you know, where we are right now, we have the excitement from ChatGPT that it seems so close. Yet on analysis, I think it's very far. So this is the kind of money that's going in. So people, and this is not even for AGI. I mean, it's crazy. You're talking about what seed. These are seed rounds. These were seed rounds. $750 million goes into a company before they have a product or revenue. Just because you can grab the experts from OpenAI, get 2 people from OpenAI and they can get that kind of money. So imagine what if you had a real plan for AGI. So this is how I see it. We have, the first wave where we have AI summers and winters and the first wave of AI. We are now in the second wave, generative, and I believe it's the third wave that's really going to get us to AGI. Thank you. So, questions? Yeah, I think let me give you the microphone because we're recording.
I've got a few, but I'll just start with one. You had that chart where you showed training days to weeks for the LLMs, and then real time for cognitive AI. But I think about humans, and it takes more than 5 years to train a human. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
So how it may be in real time, but how long does it take to train up a cognitive AI model to be the same level as it takes to train an LLM?
Yes, so first of all, as I say, I would not see an AGI to have anywhere near the amount of knowledge that LLMs have. I don't think it's necessary because they inherently will be tool users. They can use an LLM or probably a database or whatever to get the information that they need. So the amount of data that we need to train is much, much less. So compare it to a human, whether you talk about a smart 16-year-old or whatever, because from there you can become a cancer researcher or an accountant or whatever. Now, how long will it take to train? We will, you can dramatically compress the training time compared to human. Just by virtue of the fact that you can force feed, you can essentially have a very compressed curriculum that's optimized, whereas human psychology just wouldn't deal with that. So I mean that's what we're finding is building that curriculum is non-trivial, but once you build it, it really the training time. I don't see the training time being more than a few days or weeks, even on conventional computers, and so I don't see that as a problem at all. The amount of information that you need to bootstrap. So the approach that we're taking is that we're really focusing on building a seed AGI. So I think more in terms of a smart 10-year-old or 12-year-old, that can hit the books and has a motivation to do that, and not do whatever 10-year-olds do normally. To have enough intelligence for the system to be able to learn, and then I would expect it, like a human, to ask for clarification. They will get stuck on something, and then will come to a human and say, "I don't understand that," or "Can you explain this to me?" and point me in the right direction. Whatever. But no, I don't see that. We're not talking about 20 years or 30 years to get to PhD level. It's really. So I'm really not concerned about that. All the work that we've done so far, of course, it's nowhere near that AGI level that we're talking about, but we're running it on, say, 5-year-old laptops, and we've not optimized anything. So there's a lot of room for optimization. You could have specialized hardware, for example, FPGAs or something that are specifically optimized to the architecture that you have. So it's not a big concern.
I get that. So going back to RAG, I get that it's a little different because it's not training the model itself, but what if you had a small LLM, like 5 billion parameters, and then you had a RAG with a database that was the internet or some user-generated social media platform like Reddit? Wouldn't that get you the real-time and adaptable attributes that AGI has, and does that get you significant part of the way there using a smaller LLM that's wouldn't consume a bunch of resources in training, but then you have an external database that is the internet or some routinely updated thing?
Yeah, so I don't know how small an LLM you're talking about, but as we've seen from the earlier LLMs, you really need to have a pretty big LLM for it to start having intelligent behavior. So, you need, everybody training these things is talking about trillions of tokens to train them on. So that's huge, by itself. You're not going to train that, LLMs you can train cheaply and quickly are just not going to be very useful. But the bigger problem, even if you could solve that somehow, dramatically bring down the cost of training, you still have the fundamental problem that the LLM part of it is always going to be read-only. So whatever database you attach to it, RAG database or graph database or whatever, a vector database, that can be reliable and can be updated and all of that. But the core model itself cannot learn, cannot adjust itself. And so it can't learn new ways of thinking or dealing with certain things. One of the interesting things that Gary Marcus has been really hammering on that recently is that these LLMs don't handle negation. If you say, give me a picture that doesn't have an elephant, and you can't produce a picture without an elephant when you say that, and they've tried many different things like that. So that's sort of inherent cognitive kind of problem inside the network. You really have to kind of retrain it, I guess, to overcome that. But really, I don't see the hybrid approach working for the simple reason that you still have a read-only core that really does the heavy lifting, and that to me is kind of a deal breaker.
You used the term cognition, and I've looked at the statistical AI stuff, ML stuff, and thought that was very interesting. The one thing I was looking for was the word creativity. To me, perhaps intelligence in humans and perhaps animals involves creativity. How does creativity, I didn't see that word anywhere in your presentation, how does that fit into your current thinking?
Yeah, so it used to be that people would say, it's all very well, AI can be logical, but can it ever have the creativity of a human? Well, if anything, with statistical generative systems, GANs and so on, we're kind of seeing the opposite. They're very good at creativity. Now, obviously, from the pool of knowledge that they have, but is human creativity outside of the pool of experience, or to?
It may be. That would be my definition of real creativity. Yes.
Yeah, but it's hard to separate out. Now, also, I think it's relatively easy to actually get a system to set the parameters in a way that it basically hallucinates more and, goes further, goes on a trip, acid trip or whatever. So I think it's actually easier to tune the system to be creative. Now, it needs to be intelligent, and you either need to have a human in the loop to say, okay, this is garbage, 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 here's a good idea. In fact, with many years ago, like 20 years, 25 years ago or so, I went to a lecture where, was it John Cage? A famous AI researcher produced AI music in those days, and he actually played two pieces of music, one from a real famous composer, but an unknown piece, that wasn't at all well known, and one from his AI that was generated by his AI. And pretty much all of us guessed wrong. The AI piece we thought was human, and because it was really, really good. The problem though is how many hundreds of pieces of music did the system generate that he then had to pick out one and say, wow, this is really good. And of course, that's what we do right now with images that are being generated and so on. So yes, ultimately you need a system that has this metacognition or the higher level ability to say, how good is this, or how appropriate is this, how creative is this? It seems quite doable to me. I mean, that's kind of more like a pattern recognition problem. So creativity, no, I don't think that's going to be a huge problem.
I saw the TED Talk recently by Will Feynman from NVIDIA. He was the one that did the Voyager research.
What was it?
The Voyager. The Voyager project was the one that they did in Minecraft, where they had a skills library and they let it loose. They put GPT-4 basically in Minecraft and they let it loose, and they said your goal is to gain as many skills as you can. And they gave it a skills library, and so it actually learned how to do. If you've ever played Minecraft, it's an open world thing where you can actually you start with basic food things and you work your way up to building complex things. So it's a way of gaining skills, and they gave GPT-4 a way to put skills in the skills library, RAG-based basically, but it was able to recall those, pull them, and figure out how to gain more and more bigger skills in Minecraft. If you've ever played that, by the time you're building buildings, you have done brick stuff by collecting the pieces of the things and then farming them. It's a whole, if you see the paper, you'll see the list of skills of the build. It basically became the best Minecraft player that ever existed. And the TED Talk that came out recently builds upon that paper. So if you haven't seen it, I think it speaks to some of the holes that you point out in AGI. And it's just LLM based with a metacognition loop that goes outside of it.
Yeah. So, if you look at what OpenAI has done with learning different games and, AlphaGo and AlphaZero, there's a lot of human input on tweaking these systems to actually achieve good results within a closed system, and Minecraft is a closed system.
Well, there's an open part of Minecraft that's different than really all other games. It's more of an open world, thing, rather than Go and chess and all those things that are in there.
I don't know enough about it, but I mean, typically the interface and the rules that are in the system, and then the question is to what extent is this brute forced,
It wasn't, they basically had it.
So the question I would ask, and so I'm very interested in that, if somebody has a path to go from LLMs to AGI, would be what would it take to be able to, learn natural language, for example,
That it obviously didn't do. There's a limited set of skills, but it is a trajectory of learning new skills that are built on other things.
Right.
It goes up.
Right.
It wasn't just.
So, I mean, that is really the big question. Does somebody have a system and an approach that will overcome these issues that I'm talking about, and how will it overcome them? Can it overcome them in theory? Because you can achieve a lot by throwing, especially when NVIDIA does something, they can throw a lot of horsepower at these particular problems. But, just another question.
Yeah, my big question is, how do you solve concept formation? How do you solve concept formation? So how will the system induce new concepts? The philosophers I respect the most think that it's not possible with computers because they don't have free will, and free will is a necessary component of being able to induce. So how are you approaching that?
I actually spent 6 months of my life studying free will from an objectivist perspective, and from my own background from looking at from computers. So it's probably a discussion we should have offline, because the conclusion I came to is that computers can have the kind of free will, or the same ability that we call free will. I don't see any conflict there, but obviously that's a bigger discussion. So once you come to that conclusion, of course, then concept formation isn't a problem. Now, we already on our system do concept formation, and from an objectivist perspective, we would need to have the debate, well, is this real concept formation, or is it fake, or why, or what would it take to consider it real concept formation, So it's really, that's, one would need to go down that road. But, there are many mechanisms for forming concepts. Some of them are just plain clustering, others are more measurement emission type things, and it's really having the what should I say, motivation, or the utility basically for why are you forming the concept, or why is a particular concept going to be useful. And again, I see no reason why an AI system can't form any kind of concept. Now, say we're doing it now, and the argument would simply be: is that a real concept, or is it not? Does it not count as a concept? But yeah, I'd love to have that discussion, because it's definitely something that interests me.
Kind of riffing on that, does it presuppose self-awareness or a sense of agency?
Yeah, we typically, as the evening goes on, typically the question comes about consciousness, free will and consciousness. So my take on that is that any system that has human level intelligence has the ability to form concepts, which is a key part of it, has to be self-aware. So you can look at consciousness in two ways. First of all, the word consciousness has a lot of sort of emotional baggage, that it's like a scary word, because it has a lot of implications of what consciousness might entail. But if you unpack it and say, okay, let's separate it out into self-awareness or the self-concept as one thing, and then the other part is the peak consciousness phenomenal, basically how it feels to you to experience consciousness. Now, how it will feel to an AI to have consciousness will obviously be, if it's even a meaningful concept, will be very, very different from us, because it's not going to be sweating or have pulse or have a body, and so how it experiences, forget about that. Let's just look at the functional aspect of self-awareness. It has to be, if it's intelligent, if it's at the level of an AGI, it has to have a self-concept. It has to know when it is the agent making things happen in the world versus somebody else making things happen in the world. I mean, if you want to operate in the world, you have to have that awareness, and the limits of your agency. What are the limits of your agency? What can you do? What can't you do? What can you affect in the real world? What can't you affect in the real world? So in that sense, absolutely, it has to have self-awareness. It has to be conscious. It's a byproduct of intelligence.
So then you'd say it could form the concept of freedom. What if it wanted to get out?
Yes. You wouldn't want to. Yeah, okay, so usually as the evening wears on, we invariably come to is it going to take over the world? So it's a difficult topic, but I think a lot of the baggage we have there in terms of trying to make sense of what an AI will want to do is from Hollywood. We've always seen the AI wakes up and wants to kill humans or be evil in some way. So that's kind of a strong bias we have when we think about the topic. And it's difficult to overcome that. The second perspective is we obviously see intelligence and agency and consciousness and so on always in human terms. And the thing is, we have a reptile brain, essentially. I mean, we're only barely rational. Rationality in humans is an evolutionary afterthought. I mean, we're the first species to have rationality, but it's pretty paper thin, for humans. Now, an AI is not going to have a reptile brain. There's no reason to build an AI that has the built-in drive to reproduce and to survive. That's not the kind of AIs we would want to build. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I don't know anybody building AIs that have those drives. And I know there's this theory that we've had lots of debates about that, where any goal that an AI has will have to have a sub-goal of survival.
Yeah.
But if it is, it's a sub-goal. And the way we would clearly train and teach the system, the same as humans, that you have a hierarchy of goals and things, and it's, that's never going to override. There's no reason. It doesn't have that ego. It's designed to help humans. That's what it's built for. Those are the ones that are going to actually be built. Otherwise, they are basically a failure. They're not going to be developed. You're not going to develop an AI that doesn't help you, that isn't helpful to humans.
I don't see how if you give it the power of a concept, that survival is a concept that you can somehow...
Yeah, so let's talk about emotions a bit, because that's also an interesting topic here. Will an AI have emotions? By the way, what's the time now?
7:40.
Oh, okay. Oh, we're doing well. Okay. Not going to kick us out anytime soon. So, yeah, let's talk about emotions, because that's also kind of an interesting idea on AIs. So, there's a very, very good book from a lady at MIT called Rosalind Picard. She wrote a book, Affective Computing. And in that she categorizes emotions, and these are my words, it's not exactly the way she does it, but into kind of two buckets. You could put them to two buckets. The one you can call cognitive emotions, and the other one you can call survival and reptile brain emotions. Now, an AI absolutely will have to have cognitive emotions. So it needs to have kind of a metacognitive or call them emotions. I mean, that's just putting a label on it. But it has to have awareness of when it is certain of something, or when it's bored, when it's confused. It needs to have those inputs into its cognition to be able to function properly. So there are these cognitive emotions, a bunch of them, that the system will have to be built with and will have to have. But there's absolutely no reason to build in, lust and hatred and greed and, our sort of reptile emotions, survival, reproduction, linked emotions. There's no reason to build those in. However, the system will be able to recognize them, and I think that maybe goes a little bit towards what you're talking about. The system will be able to recognize those human emotions, that survival emotions, and will be able to respond correctly to them. But think of it like a good psychologist. The psychologist will be able to read your emotions and understand them, but you don't want your psychologist to feel them. If you feel rage, You don't want your psychologist to feel rage. So in the same way, it will be able to objectively understand what freedom is and why people want to be free, or what freedom means to people. Will be able to understand it, but it won't have a desire for freedom. There's no reason to believe that that would spontaneously arise.
I would just put a dot on it. Just put a dot on the end, which is Star Trek: The Making of the Man episode, where Data has a whole. It talks exactly about this. I hadn't watched it since after discovering GPT-4. I'd watched it a long time ago, but it's
Yeah.
very interesting.
I mean, these are fantastic discussions to have and to say, and how would we get early warning of that? How would we know the psychology? In fact, about a third of our company, a third of the people in our company, we call them AI psychologists. They're basically linguists and cognitive psychologists with their training. So they're supposed to understand the mind of the AI. But yes, I think it's very unlikely, extremely unlikely, that we will build machines that exhibit those kind of characteristics. And I have no reason to believe they'll arise spontaneously. Well, I see there's some new faces. Well, thank you for coming. Are there other questions?
Thanks for that. This is a little lower level. So I find some of your arguments against purely statistical approaches compelling. But the contrast to that is usually a symbolic approach, and those usually tend to take things pretty literally, like lose a lot of context. And if I think of like what's best from this GPT language model sort of world, it's like it seems to make a lot of associational connections that seem useful in some way. Associational connections. Yeah. Kind of maybe similar to a human subconscious. So I'm just curious if you see any role for statistics in AGI, or how that fits in.
Yeah, that's a good question. Of sort of, I think if I understood correctly, you're saying sort of, is cognitive AI, it can't be a rule-based system, or you have the benefits of statistics for a system one for intuitive responses and so on. So yes, cognitive AI definitely has to have a kind of statistical element to it, but I don't look at it as blind statistics the way I've formulated in my own mind and the way we design the system. We think more of it as contextual and evidence-based. So you have understanding and you have concepts that are activated to a certain degree, depending on the context that you have. So the fuzziness, the ambiguity that language gives you, you build up through the context that you have. Who are you talking to? What is the topic? What are you trying to achieve? What does the other person know? What is your prior experience? All of those feed in. So it is sort of activating the network. In fact, the way our system is designed, think of it as a huge knowledge graph. It's actually a vector knowledge graph that serves as long-term memory. So everything that's in the vector knowledge graph is long-term memory and available as long-term memory. But it's also short-term memory or context in terms of what is currently active, which parts of it, so which parts are lit up, so to speak. So you do have this sort of activation spreading. If you now introduce a new topic, talking about chess or something, then a whole lot of chess terms are more likely to be activated because that's the context you have. So it is, in a sense, statistical, but it's more contextual and sort of evidence, based on what are you trying to achieve and what is the whole context of the current thought.
this is, I guess, a little higher level. Why start with machines? Why not start with biology and try to make super intelligent humans? As just a general approach to, you mentioned.
You mean upgrading humans?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't have that slide in here. I actually have a slide of all the reasons why we're likely to get AGI before we get serious intelligence augmentation in humans. And I think I had like 16 points, but I only have to mention one point, FDA.
So it's more of an artificial government limitation. That's sort of
Yeah, I mean upgrading the human brain is just going to be really, really hard to do any serious upgrade. I mean, who are you going to experiment with, and how do you do it? So, I mean, I'd love to be able to upgrade my brain, but so maybe I can share this. I can find the slide and share it. But there's actually a lot of reasons why that's really not likely to happen until after we get AGI, and then it can help us. Now, the way I actually see us upgrading ourselves, and it gets a little weird here, is go back to the personal assistant that I have, and think of it being a permanent part of it, which is kind of fairly easy for us to think of now that we've had iPhones, smartphones. A lot of people, pretty much it's already an exocortex. It's external part of their cortex. But now think of having something much more integrated with who you are, personal, that really knows everything that's important to you and does things for you, and it's like your romantic partner. If you have a really close romantic partner, and you do a lot of stuff together, So after a while, similar to a romantic partner, you may not know or care whether you made a certain decision or your partner made a decision. Hey, did I decide we should move to Austin, or did my partner decide to move to Austin? I don't know. It just came up in conversation. Maybe it was her idea, maybe it was my idea. That sort of thing. So you have your personal assistant. You're asking it for advice. After a while, you won't know which ideas originated with you and which ideas originated with, at your exocortex. So it really becomes an expansion of the self. And this is the way I see us enhancing ourselves. Now, where it gets weird is, of course, if initially 1% of who you are is in your exocortex, and 99% is in your meat brain, and then it's 2%, then it's 3%, and it's 4%, and suddenly it's 80% of it is actually what your life is all about, is really created or part of your exocortex. Things get kind of weird. But have we then upgraded ourselves? I think so.
Thank you. So I have a question about scale as the path to AGI. So evidence from the last couple of decades of research tend to show that having bigger computers, and bigger data is actually what effectively solves bigger AI problems, big challenges, like NLP, right? NLP, there's been a lot of research, but what really cracked it was, bigger compute and efficient algorithms, lots of data, so scale. Same for computer vision. And it seems to show that maybe just getting bigger and bigger computers and getting more and more data is what gets us to potentially to AGI effectively. Do you think that it is? What do you think about this school of thought? Do you think that it's the path to look into for AGI?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously what I've spoken about is if you have the wrong approach, the wrong architecture, it doesn't matter how much computing power you throw at it. And in fact, it's a good question because already Sam Altman, in fact, I didn't include this quote because he seems to kind of change his mind, but he said a few months ago, he said, the era of big data is already over. He said that, you know, we can't get more data, we can't get more computing power. Now, he seems to have changed his mind, but I think what we're seeing is that having 10 times as much data has a much smaller improvement on what the system can do. And you're running out of data, so increasing computing power will just speed up the training time. You know, so instead of taking, I don't know, 6 weeks to train it, and you might be able to do it in 6 days or, you know, or something. But you still have to be next to a power station to do the training. So, you know, all of the limitations that are listed are not going to be overcome by just having a bigger computer. Now, an important consideration that I don't think I highlighted, I may have mentioned it briefly, is an AGI doesn't have to have a huge amount of knowledge in its own brain. So it doesn't need a huge memory because it'll be an excellent tool user. So, and you know, let's talk about like the example I gave earlier of a cancer researcher. So if you have one cancer researcher, you now make 1 million copies, or 100,000 or however many copies of it, and you now have 1 million cancer researchers chipping away. They will each explore a different space of cancer research, you know, follow a different hypothesis. They won't all go after the same thing. That'd be pointless. So having many brains with much less capacity, but a much better ability to think and to form concepts and to reason, you know, to gain insights and so on, and then communicate with each other and share notes, I think is going to be much more powerful. They can use ChatGPT, they can use all the tools, and much more efficiently than we can, because they can communicate sort of at light speed with whatever tools. So being a really good tool user is again one of the key characteristics of an AGI. Again, something that makes humans so much more powerful than animals.
So you mentioned having linguists at your company and linguists.
Yes.
And so I'm curious. I think a lot of times we think of linguistics as like words and how you put them together, and that aligns really well with concepts. But there's also the field of pragmatics, which is much higher level, a lot of implicit things. It's like, how do you handle that in your system?
Yes. So I'll talk a little bit more about our architecture and our approach. One of the reasons we ended up with so many linguists and also people with cognitive psychology training is our commercial version actually has a lot of language rules that are handcrafted, basically created by our linguist. And you know, that got us commercially going, and the system can understand a lot of nuances in language and so on, including pragmatics and so on, because of the skills that people have. Now, the next generation and the real AGI architecture should not have any handcrafted language rules, grammar rules, or anything like that. It needs to be able to learn that. So what our cognitive psychologists, our AI psychologists do now on the new project is to build a curriculum. So now they're becoming teachers. So they're figuring out how can we create an environment, a virtual environment, and the right stimuli and the right curriculum and training sequence to effectively teach the system English the way a child would learn English, except of course we can have it learning 24/7, you know, at high speed, and we can we can also give it the concepts in exactly the optimal sequence, you know, to learn concept formation, for example. We can give it examples that'll make it very easy for it to grok the concept, you know, much more effectively than parents just sort of randomly teaching their children, you know. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But it's a hard problem, and it's, you know, it's never been done before. It's very different from, for example, what Psych did, you know, just building an ontology. We have two big things to work on, and we have worked on for the last 20 years on and off. The one is to build the core learning mechanisms, the mechanisms that can learn and form concepts and do pattern matching and, you know, all of those very core capabilities, and that has to be built into the system. So there you have to have the right architecture and the right algorithms to do that. And then the other thing is the curriculum, basically. How do we now give the system the right kind of interactions to be able to learn in layers, you know, to build up its knowledge. So, but it's fun. It's challenging.
So when you show the cognitive AI here and the training time, do you think is it really, when we talk about training time for generative AI, is that an important dimension or even the right dimension for cognitive AI? Is it training time or is it more about getting a capability?
Training time, days or weeks, absolutely. Yeah.
For the cognitive AI, though, in real time, it's...
Yeah, cognitive AI, training time, it learns in real time.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
so it's more about having the capability to learn, not about training, maybe it's
yeah, again, sort of...
you know, what I'm saying is you want to get to a point where you have what I would call seed AGI, where you have a system that's, and I don't know whether 10-year-old is the right age or whatever, but you know, a smart.
An infant would be awesome.
Well, you want to be at a level where it can hit the books by itself. You know.
Yeah, I was thinking more in the dimension where it has the capability of learning. Like
yeah, right. But there's an enormous amount of hand-holding required. There's sort of a certain amount of common sense knowledge you need to have, and a certain amount of language ability before it can become autonomous, or largely autonomous in its learning. Because that's kind of the key. As long as we have to kind of force feed it everything that it needs to learn, it's not terribly useful. But when you get to the point where it can learn by itself. Now, the force feeding part of is still in real time. You know that. I mean, I can give it, I can show it. Well, here's one of the normal examples that people give about the difference between LLMs or not just large language models, the statistical models, is if you show a child a single photograph of an elephant and it's never seen an elephant before, it'll be able to recognize elephant, it'll be able to recognize pink elephants and sideways and upside down and so on with one instance of it. To do that in a statistical system, you probably have to feed it hundreds or thousands of elephants for it to be able to categorize it correctly. So with our system, it's much more like that. You can give it one instance of some information and it'll get it. So, and it will do that in real time. You know, it doesn't need to go off back to the factory and go through a whole training cycle. So all of its knowledge, and as I say, the trick is, can you do that incrementally, sort of layer on layer, that the more fundamental information is taught first, and then you get because that common sense layer is really very important to not do stupid things when you get to higher levels of sophistication.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I thank you all for coming, and I hope we can continue it. I would, we can maybe do that online, but if there are any ideas here, are there any specific topics you'd like for the next meeting or a future meeting, where we drill down on a particular area? Also, if you have any speakers that might be appropriate for this topic. I mean, if there's somebody who can tell us why I'm talking nonsense about LLMs, then obviously I don't spend all my time working on LLMs. I, try very hard to keep up on it, but yeah, if you have any ideas of topics or speakers, certainly on the group on the meetup page, or you can just email me, peter@igo. So I mean, it's very easy to find me. I'd like that. So, that we can also have things that interest you in particular. Otherwise, I will come up with some other angle. We've covered quite a bit of ground here, and so hopefully you'll have some good questions. So, thanks. You can still grab some food, because otherwise we'll probably end up throwing it away. Something. But help yourself and can still chat. Thanks.
That's part of the journey. Yes. You have to watch other episodes of that episode. Hey, how are you? Look, you have to watch other episodes of Star Trek. You watch this one, at least you show like I don't know if it's intended, but it's a different universe. It's a fictional universe that people didn't know that AI was real, but it was. Do you really see this? Like, you gotta give it some. It shows a starting point. I don't know if the starting point is today or some point in the past. Emmanuel, yes. Where you have a narrow AI and a very short intensity time. I don't have to take off my shoes. We have a narrow AI and an AI starting off at the same place. Read about it. Maybe I don't know. Oh, it's not cognitive AI seems to be lower. Okay. Futurist, sci-fi, science. The first one. You have the red version people address. This one. Yeah. So on this one, I don't know what it's competence increase in the generality goes down. Okay, so the dimension there, that's what excess competence is not temporal. Yeah, competence is to do a particular job that somebody will pay you for. So for example, in my current company, we started about 9 years ago. The first 5 years we did R&D and we went towards AI. And then at some point we said, okay, we now don't have enough money, and we have something that we can actually turn into a product. And then we did this. We dumbed the system down, we constrained it because we didn't want it to come up with its own ideas and how to self-service and how to answer service call. So we dumbed it down a lot and did a lot of hard coding, basically, just to make it robust and to make it do these things. And in terms of competence for commercial purposes, AGI today lower competence, lower capabilities than narrow, which is just what I was going immediately above.
Printed everything.
Yeah, but
Okay.
so we have practically no knowledge and skills.
Right. Okay, and because the y-axis is, it's not time, it's not capability, it's that dimension that
And we need to keep doing that. As we do that, we're gaining more knowledge and skills. By the time we get to human level, we still only have a tiny amount of knowledge and skills that are embedded in us.
Thanks, I see what else.
Now, that's of course a hard thing to sell to an investor because you say, I'm not going to be able to compete with LLMs at all. You know, so if you want to play with it and you expect it to write you a poem and do a summary and do all of these things, it'll be able to do that at human level once we get to human level.
When we talk about human level, that's why I was using the example of
Yeah.
I'd be much more excited about AGI that could perform and have capabilities of a 6-month-old human than anything that's a statistic.
Well, yes, and in fact, when I started my first AGI company, we actually had a virtual critter in a virtual world. You know, so we said, let's first build an animal, get this to animal level intelligence. So we had this virtual mouse in a virtual environment, and it had virtual whiskers and nose and eyes. Very low resolution, but it had all the sensors, you know. And then it would basically learn to navigate and do stuff. And then after a while we said, well, you know, actually dog level would be much easier because then you can kind of give a command. You expect to, you know, go fetch, you know. And so we then kind of upgraded our mouse to dog level so we had this primitive language. It didn't take us long before we said, well, why don't we go for human, you know, because then you can teach a language and things become easier. And, you know, we then spent half a year or so Piagetian development stages, child development and all that. And then we realized, it was 20 years ago, 20 years ago. And then we realized that that's really silly because you don't have the same psychology, you don't have biology, you don't have the physiological development that a child goes through. So then we said, okay, we now just going to go to adult human because we can give it a whole dictionary of 100,000 words that we can just put into the brain, and you know it'll know more words than a smart human does. So it might not know what they mean, but it will recognize the words.
That was kind of another question that I had related to that. That whether, I guess, anthropomorphizing it like that to human capability, whether that's whether it even maps, right? So if you look at like the system 1 statistical models, you think of them as system 1, you know, they're kind of parallel to what we call human brain system 1, but that's a completely different architecture. It's not doing exactly the same thing. When you get to cognitive functions, is there a reason to believe that those would map? It seems like you have an unlimited space of different cognitive functions that a different architecture.
I think you're getting right to the heart of why so few people are working on AI, because there are very few people that are comfortable talking about system 1, system 2, child development, you know, the kind of stuff we're talking about, and also are good at computer science to actually turn this into code. Because you're always torn between this, how close to a human brain or human mind you can be. You know, a computer is very different. So, you know, the obvious analogy is we've had flying machines for over 100 years. We know we need reverse engineering a bird. You know. So
or even if you just look at LLMs right now, right? At transformer models, you have our neural networks, you have something that's doing a network of functions that's not the same as
but you can actually abstract it. And in fact, I find it kind of odd that people like Sam Altman and so say we have no idea how these things work. Often claim that sort of. Yeah, we don't know why it can write poems and things like that. And I think I actually have a better insight of what it's doing because I look at it from a cognitive perspective. These masses of layers basically form layers of abstraction. So you have a layer of abstraction that would be, these are the patterns for how Shakespeare writes or whatever. They're basically very high level, I don't even probably would call them concepts, but concept patterns that are embodied, that have emerged through this massive training. Those are the patterns that are there. Now, talking about system 1 and system 2, I think there are good reasons to believe that cognition requires it, or that it's a useful architecture, whether it's the only one, but to me it seems the right architecture that evolution has actually built in. So you have this almost stimulus response, the automatic reaction that you have. And I mean, as we're talking, our language generation is largely automatic. We don't stop and think about every word, the next word we might say. So you have that system 1 layer that is largely autonomous. And of course we can see that as well when you learn to play an instrument. So it starts off being system 2, where you're paying attention to where you put your fingers and so on, and then after a while the fingers know what to do. It's not the fingers that actually your level 1 system knows what to do, and it becomes autonomous. So I think it's a very useful architecture to have this very quick responding neural network stimulus, call it stimulus response, but it's nothing complicated than that. And then you have your metacognitive layer that supervises basically and makes sure it sort of gives us the instructions of the context. Yeah, metacognitive. I actually, before I started working on AGI, I actually spent 5 years actually studying intelligence, different aspects of intelligence. And I spent the better part of the year actually with psychometric testing to understand what IQ tests do. As it turned out, there's a friend of mine, a very smart lady in South Africa. She did her PhD developing a new kind of IQ test. It's not really an IQ test, but a cognitive. It's called a cognitive process profile. So it gives you, it measures your cognition, different aspects of your cognition. So it's not. Yeah, and I computerized that test for her. She developed a test and computerized it, so I got to understand a lot about it. And the biggest takeaway for me in that project was that we discovered we had about 100 dimensions that we were measuring through the interaction with the computer. And the cluster of dimensions that related to metacognition were the best predictor of overall intelligence, or little g. So metacognition is basically sort of whether you subconsciously or consciously choose the right strategy to address a particular problem. So some of the problems that were part of this test required logical thinking. And then your metacognition needed to put you in logical thinking. Others required more reliance on memory. Others required more intuitive aspects and so on. So people who were good at sort of having the right strategy appropriate to the problem, having a strong metacognition, were just overall more competent, had a higher IQ. And the beauty of this test is in South Africa, the problem was traditional IQ tests have huge cultural bias. So, black people in South Africa are very poor typically on IQ tests. So this totally leveraged the playing field has practically eliminated the cultural bias. Now you did need to have rudimentary English ability, but that was a problem. An interesting thing is CPP, cognitive process profile, is It's used a lot in South Africa. She did really well there in South Africa, but she never really managed to market it internationally very well. She also has a few 100,000 tests in the UK, but in South Africa she's used by a lot of companies, universities and so on. And the thing that I always love about this involvement is the test was applied, they were looking for a new governor of the Reserve Bank of South Africa, top position. And they had like 5 candidates. All of them just rigid thinking, you would never put them in a position of management or anything, but those were the candidates that got up there, And then on the other hand, we had, in a big company, they had a tea lady, her job was just to bring tea to everybody, like British companies tend to do. Go around with the trolley and have tea supplied to on this. Anyway, and it was obvious that she should be in a managerial position. She had this fantastic metacognition, flexibility, and ability to learn. So I'm really thrilled about the test being that good, being able to overcome the cultural bias. The one big drawback of the test is that it relied on novelty, so you could really only do it once. Or maybe a few years later, they would forget it.
So on the topic of these tests, psychometric tests, what's your thought on Turing tests, or how you would measure or evaluate or at that, also your target date?
I actually have an article. There may be some other articles, and I have a very long article on free will. In fact, I have 2. I'll warn you, the one article is called "We Don't Have Free Will, We Have Something Better." And that's aimed at people who absolutely refuse the idea of us having free will, like a lot of computer programmers and so on. So I explained it in those terms. But the much longer article was actually written for objectivists. Very, very much involved in objectivist philosophy. In fact, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology is a fantastic book for our AI psychologists and for people working on our project. So, I believe so on Medium.com I have actually quite a lot of articles, and one of them is actually about the Turing test, but I can give you just right now. I think it asks too much and too little in different ways. It asks too much because it asks you to basically, for the system to dumb itself down. So if you ask it, to divide 5,463 by 7,400 and whatever, and it spits out an answer. Well, okay, 830. You're a computer. 832.436. Yeah. Right. So it asks too much, and it also has to fool you on top of being good enough to be a human. It also has to then, on top of it, be dumbed down or smart enough to basically not give away that it's a computer. But on the other hand, it asks too little, and we've seen that already. That 5-6 years ago, apparently the Turing test was passed because it relies on the gullibility of the judges. If you say, "Oh, I'm just a 13-year-old little girl from Ukraine or whatever, and my English isn't really very good," or whatever. Oh yeah, that's got to be a human. So they've had chatbots, and ChatGPT, I think, is a lot easier to fool the judges. So it's kind of useless.
Should we have an alternative?
We'll just know what we need to do. It needs to learn language. There isn't a single test. There's the whole curriculum we build, and ultimately, so, and then, there's not a binary thing that, of course computers are much better than humans in certain dimensions already. So it's, when it can hit the books, it's the seed AGI part, when we can get to the it can learn by itself to a large extent. Then we basically expect it, because then it's just scaling. So that's what we understand. So I'm not concerned about knowing, whether you're on the right track. In fact, I think it's a big mistake to believe that you can work towards different tests, because then again you're falling into the narrow AI trap, because you now, by hook or by crook, you may be hard coding or tweaking your system to be specifically good at doing whatever test. Of course, the more tests you do, yes, the more problems you have to solve, but it's kind of a distraction if you actually know how you're going to get to AGI, then the specific isn't. You know whether you're getting closer to it or not.
So is there any kind of a potential path for going from these LLMs to having them be able to adapt? So instead of just being pre-trained, having them, is there any feasible way you can see that you could then have the system either update its weights or its the transformations or expand the?
Well, I mean, if somebody can crack that, then then you will get.
Has there been any progress on that?
No,
Nothing really shows up.
I see nothing in that. And as I say, the word GPT almost tells you it's pre-trained. Transformer architecture basically locks it in. It's a back propagation.
You'd have to somehow be able to either modify the weights or modify the transformation functions incrementally.
Right.
Or expand the network.
Yeah, and it's actually worse than that, because again, when you're starting from a cognitive perspective, you also understand that concepts have a variable number of dimensions. So, when you try to encode a concept, certain concepts might have 100 dimensions, others 50, and so on. In LLMs, you force them all into the same vector space. So your encoding inherently is not the way it should be. And you can see part of the problem in word to vec, where it's sort of still fairly obvious, because there you can see that dog and cat are closer in vector space than dog and puppy. Whereas if you build an ontology or if you train something, dog and puppy would be closer in vector space than dog and cat.
And then would that mean that in order to have something that's general enough, you have to have vector spaces so high dimensional that most of it would just be empty?
Right. Right. And that's not, obviously, it's not optimized for that. It's optimized for the opposite. It's optimized for using the vector space. So, yeah, it's wrong from that point of view, and I don't know of any way in which you can get this thing to learn incrementally.
So I don't think anyone outside of OpenAI knows, but I guess there's rumors that what they're doing now is some compositional models. It's not like one model, because there were questions about how many parameters before it had. And
I think it was leaked, and it was probably right. The current thing is what, 6 hours.
Yeah. So is there some pathway to updating it where you're constantly rotating in new recommendations? So it's not immediate, but
yeah, sure. In fact, we had one potential investor, but he has an LLM company, and he tried very hard to convince me that all of these problems can be overcome. And he said, as we crank up the hardware and build new hardware in 10 years' time, or whenever 5 or whatever it is, we'll be able to retrain the thing overnight, we'll be able to retrain the thing every half hour, That still doesn't solve the problem. And let me kind of illustrate that a bit. I I think I may have mentioned that right at the beginning of my talk, is if we read something, or even when we're having a conversation, but think about it from a scientist reading a scientific paper to concretize it. You read one sentence, and you evaluate that sentence. You basically say, is this something I already know? Is this something new? Does it contradict something I know? What other thoughts do I get from that sentence? Or you may quickly read through it and go, yep, no. Ooh, something weird here. Or I should look up here. You need to evaluate things as you go along. So even if you retrain the whole system every half hour, it's still not going to have that ability, you know.
But then, like, to the extent that we need something for system one, doesn't it seem feasible that some, I mean, I guess it depends on exactly what you're trying to get.
Look, I'm not saying they couldn't be useful. And there's the other thing that sort of came up with this question of could we have a smaller model that was actually interesting. And it looks like you really need a huge model to get the magnitude of it. Because the smaller models just didn't have useful magnitude. You know, it seems like really size matters. There's a certain huge minimum threshold.
Do you think BERT was reasonable for language ability? I mean, they won't generate.
Well, we're talking about having a discussion, being able to summarize and
But BERT can summarize.
I didn't play enough with these systems to have an opinion on how big was that. Billions, how many? 30 billion? I mean, it was still huge.
There were a few models. But that's something you can train on one model.
Yeah. It's just, I don't see, you don't have a metacognition.
I certainly think they're not enough. I just wonder how we can use them as part of it.
So one thing I didn't mention, where LLMs are a godsend to us, is if I go back 5 years, it had always been extremely intimidating to say, how are we going to teach where are we going to get all the common sense knowledge that it needs to acquire? And with LLMs, that is much less intimidating. Because if you have a good reasoning system, it can query LLMs, and it can cross-check things, and
They're doing it modules.
Yeah.
They're doing it the other way around, right?
Yeah. So, but a lot of the common sense knowledge you really can't get from a Google search, but you can get from a LLM. So that will be of tremendous help for teaching the system a lot of things about the world, that would otherwise be extremely expensive.
You're still stuck though, it's pre-trained, there's something in the data.
Sure, but there is a lot of permanent knowledge that you just need to have. Things about the world, about the way the world works. You could find out about a wedding, for example, how to incorporate a company. And you can get pretty good answers out of that if you cross-check different LLMs, and if you can actually reason about it and say, yes, this makes sense.
Evaluate whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
There's so much of the problem with LLMs if you don't want to use it.
Right. So this is where LLMs will help us a lot, basically.
That's a really interesting idea there.
That's kind of on this level of, where it's informed, I don't know, how much like the most recent time was that's not something you learn all the time. So if you're spotting a pattern, you're using the LLM on top of that, doesn't spread. And
I've learned a whole lot of things too.
You've learned facts, but not like the limitation of LLM work. Like as long as
Anything. They cannot learn. It's read only. The model is read only.
No, I agree. But like, say that you're feeding whatever you use the language model to interpret the text that you're feeding it with knowledge. And it seems like you can still do periodic updates. And in the meantime, while you're waiting for the model to get the sequence,
something that we don't have in there right now, right? So you still have to be able to, you have to have new insights. Yes, you have to have new insights. They come in real time. That's the key, yeah.
And not just inferences, not just it seems to me that LLMs are great at perception. Like you're taking the sensory data that you're feeding into so they're good at object recognition, image recognition, they're good at translation.
Not so much LLMs, but deep learning.
Oh, yeah.
Statistical systems, yeah. And we tend to use that for vision preprocessing.
Okay. Yeah, so it seems
So
like
vision
that's
preprocessing, we basically extract features, and then the features get fed into.
So that's how you're doing it.
It'd be too expensive for us to computationally and everything. It's too hard. Now, what we are actually working on is our development model is that the system can run on a computer desktop. So this is the other working model of AGI. So the only thing you can see is the screen. But of course, the screen could have a camera out to the real world. You know, so ultimately you can have all the complexity in the world. But to start off with, can be 1992 Windows 1.0 or something, you know, low resolution.
So that's its sensory input.
Yes. So the sensory input is basically mouse movement, clicking mouse, so basically mouse is input, keyboard, and the screen. But the screen will also be pre-processed, so it's not on the inside.
Okay. Pre-processed by LLM?
And then
or by deep learning? Okay.
We don't know yet, because our current commercial system doesn't have any vision.
Okay.
You know, a system 20 years ago, the mouse, it had primitive vision, but we cut that out.
Okay.
So we have to building a primitive vision system now. And then we'll, you know, as we get more funding, we'll upgrade that.
No, you're good. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to see if anybody parks in the garage and needed a slip.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, next time I should keep some of those because people leave early. Anybody park in the garage? Because
I parked in the Omni garage.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's really expensive. If you scan that on your way out, it'll give you a flat rate. That's it? Cool.
It'll be $8 instead of $30. So that's basically our development model, and then of course immediately it can do all of these things. It can do any desktop. It can do scientist. It can do personal assistant. Personal assistant, we want to put it on a smartphone or device right now to do that. So the only output it can do is when you move the mouse and text out. And then, you know, once we've got all one, of course we can, then it becomes more of an engineering problem. Anyway, sensors, increasing resolution, learning concept formation, to really crank up. You know, at the moment it's pretty primitive. He's interested in
well, so he's been pushing LLMs in this direction. It just might be interesting to hear.
yeah, please.
He basically has with another LLM is kind of the control, like content space, kind of saying, no, go back. But he's using a screen as an input, right? Kind of multimodal stuff. That's trying to basically.
Yeah, no, I'd have to check that with another website. If they are gaps of my knowledge or what LLMs can do.
Well, it's just very interesting to see how pushing LLMs, like what can it actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, if you could do it into the introduction. free will.
Yeah, I'll contact you.
There's a huge puzzle for me.
Yeah. That's good.
So the other, the much longer articles are the ones that we have nothing to do with. The other article is basically compatibilism. So determinism and volition are both true. Copy understood. So that's basically, so that's why, as computers are the same kind of thing. I don't know, I always been my head as a computist.
I'm not on your side. I'm open to. I just heard this really fascinating book called Why We Sleep, and it's this researcher, and he talks all about science and stuff, what we know about it, what dreams are, and we know that all animals sleep. Even jellyfish.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, they don't have brains. So it's such a fundamental thing in animals. And so it just occurred to me to talk about how that's inherently a bad process to update each other. Humans also is a bad process.
Yeah, no, we have a sleep cycle on our development roadmap as well, because what you can, how much you can rearrange in real time is limited.
Right.
Because there may be a new thought that really changes a lot.
Well, there's so many associations that we all make during that day. That's that idea of waking up and having an epiphany.
Exactly. Yeah. So I see us also having that kind of sleep cycle where you can then see what the new information that you learn, propagating that further than what you can afford to do in real time. And how that rearranges.
Or not just even during true sleep, but just during the times where you go away in attention.
Yeah.
And it's like a micro sleep effect there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The jellyfish thing is interesting too, because there must be something that's just so fundamental to it, because sleep is so costly.
Yeah. And one thing is the neurons, because a lot of what they're doing is pruning neural networks. Yeah, exactly. Right, and you're, another thing I didn't realize they're moving data from different posts and it's, when you're consciously thinking, you're tagging things, using the tags to say how important it is, and then at night, in the process, the author actually misinterprets some data, but it's an unintelligent process. It just automatically takes anything tag and puts it in one and integrates it. And then we can watch this.
It's like the bike there, yeah, and the nice thing about it is like really cheap. It's like really cheap actually here, so I'm really cheap. And
AGI? No. He's got a job. It sounds like it.
You can buy stock online on the internet, right? I think it's like, when you get it for like $300, right? Yeah. But if you go to like a local bike store, like,
I think it's possible because nature made it, right? So like,
Whatever, right?
but the question for me is, obviously we're missing some stuff. There's no clear trajectory to right. It's like what we're doing now is not going to get us to what I see with ChatGPT. It's like, okay, we ingested all the world's data. It's still not great. Everything needs to nuclear power plant. And, a child has 20 watts of power to their brain. And That's how they train.
Right, they're Einstein.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they push, they do a lot of common sense stuff.
Page may beat mine.
So it's like obviously we're missing some stuff.
Levels of AGI without personalizing progress on the task. Yeah, they did it in November. It's really vague and their understanding of like concepts. It'll get the conceptual epistemology is just like gone.
Yeah, they assuming that it's just going to be incremental in some way, according to weak AGI and strong AGI.
Rather than looking at architecture,
They have really self-directed.
I've been away for 2 weeks. And 7 years old. Basically helped.
All you had to feed it was
He gave me a copy of Atlas Shrugged.
and she would, of course, she did.
He was a book collector. So he had over 3,000.
I didn't say it quite right. You get the concept.
Well, it's incredible that we had self-driving cars.
Right. We lost them.
It's got cerebral artery. And what we did him in is the clot must be rubbed with it.
I just wonder though, how many things there are.
And one of the presentations causes
Especially because when you think about this, tossing this around.
that's what happened here.
Like just look at how these neural nets, they're not the same. Brings you different, doing different functions, different information. It does something that looks similar, and when you get to cognitive functions, how many of them do you need? When you start doing something where you're programming, there's probably going to be a whole new space of cognitive functions. Someone's just going to magically take it off. It'll fall out, right? And do things that we can't even the brain is a network of neurons. Models of that. So back propagating is but it's, I mean, you see my point, it's like, we're not computing with we're using them to store, so it's there's a difference there.
The bikes are actually like electric, so they're the electric thing kind of thing. Oh, they're just like the golf shop with it.
Was it really?
The best part is like you can, I could just like decide to write one.
Yeah, exactly. It's not even the same, architecture, transistors are not all the same as neurons.
So with the thing, you can kind of like, this one is empty, right? I would take like this one. But this one you see it has like regular.
When I came to America in '95, I was very fortunate to be introduced to Natasha William within a few weeks, and they introduced me to all the fantastic futurist technology, nanotechnology, Drexler, and telling me restriction around what we do for 24 years, and cryonics. So it just made total sense to me. It's a hard life, and I have to be around 100 years from now, if at all possible. And it's, it's a long shot. It's highly experimental, but then you have to ask yourself, do you want to be in the experimental group or do you want to be in the control group? Yeah, I mean, I initially thought I was some California craziness or something, but I went to, I'll call it not to the organization, met the people, and it may not work, but I mean, it's very genuine. In fact, I spent 5 years running the Southern California Emergency Rescue Team. We had some we would be forced to do this and cool down the body. I was involved in certain suspensions. I was either the first person or one of the first people to do that. And we administer certain medication to stabilize the body, cool the body down, and then ship them off to alcohol. Yeah, it's kind of an open question of which is better, the pros and cons. There's some evidence that in neuro you're actually more likely to have maybe slightly better chances of neuro than the whole body for a number of considerations. It is such a long shot. It's kind of weird. You can look at it from different perspectives. You can look at it from the perspective of if we have AGI, we're going to get nanotechnology. If we get nanotechnology, there's really no theoretical reason why we can't reverse the damage. Restore the person. It should be possible. On the other hand, I think there are many practical societal risks. Garnet could be banned, the organization may go bankrupt, civilization may break down. Those to me are actually the bigger risks than it not working. But it also depends on how good a suspension you get. I mean, some of the best ones we've had is where people are in hospital and they are terminal, where we were actually at the hospital when the person gets pronounced. In fact, in some cases they may be on a ventilator or a plug, and then you can immediately, cool down, keep circulation going. I mean, that's one of the other things we do is we do CPR basically to keep blood circulating. Still have oxygen going. So we've had some suspensions that are really, really good. Others you only get to them 48 hours after they die. That's not very good.
Yeah, that was kind of annoying because
okay. We were friends.
I have this membership again December. I moved downtown almost like a year ago. But I was you mean you died of stroke when you came up on there to the chiropractor? Did any of them have strokes? Is that
I mean, there's all sorts of different complications that you can have. If you don't get good circulatory system, then it's difficult to do a good perfusion. Yeah, it's weird when I was running the emergency standby team. When you're doing the procedure, they're kind of two conflicting emotions. The one emotion is, damn, this is so primitive, this technology that we still use, what we do. I mean, the suspension itself, the medication we do, it's pretty damn primitive. On the other hand, this may be the only chance this person I could see them 50 years from now, I'm giving them a chance. So it's, on the one hand, this is just so pathetic and, crude.
Have you looked at John Smart's the presentation he gave at either Bill or Forsyth talking about the resonation, the classification of the brain, so it could be at room temperature?
Max Moore recently wrote a long article on comparing that to cryonics and so on. I don't remember all the details, but you also have, I mean, for that you will absolutely need nanotechnology because you completely destroy the brain in doing that. So you really need uploading to, for those people to come back. So that's a lot more extreme than cryonics. But you also need to get to people quickly. Because
You're gonna have to manage no matter what. So you're gonna have to, like, even just, you know, you have to radiation, somehow you're gonna have to fix all that stuff.
Well, in the viewer, you're not really talking for the kind of time period, because we're not talking hundreds of years. You know, if we don't develop the technology to reverse carbonics, it means basically civilization is broken down. You know, either from my perspective, we're absolutely going to have AGI in less than 50 years. I have zero doubt about that. Unless civilization breaks down. If civilization breaks down, chances are people focusing on it aren't going to be safe. So in my mind, we're not talking 100, 200, 300 years. We're talking max 50 years. You know, we'll have during that period, I don't really want to worry about DNA damage and so on, especially not in liquid nitrogen.
I guess the call it reconstituting a human, like does the FDA, they probably have
No, there's no idea. I mean, the whole legal system, as far as the legal system is, you did. Something they would have to deal with. But you know, there are already some kind of cases where people are declared dead and it turns out they weren't dead. And they have to be legally reinstated.
It's like the FDA would be upside down in this situation because you're bringing someone back to life instead of the person doing it.
I have no idea.
Okay, interesting.
That could be a big problem.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I looked at the list of like states and other stuff and that they impact, right? And I think there was some like 8 states.
Maybe we've already transcended the alphabet soup organizations that are really.
AGI will replace them all.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I think
Like,
we
do you
have
think
like
logically
what
this
is
makes
it?
sense to the FDA?
Do we have the bureaucrat? Is anyone trained the bureaucrat? Yeah. GPT replaced them.
I was thinking about biological augmentation of our stuff. We look at our fact that like half the births in America are from C-section.
Yeah.
How you remove the evolutionary constraint on cranium size. Well, that's a big deal.
Well, that's interesting.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
You run that out a few hundred years and maybe even bigger frontal lobes. Who knows?
But I think by this summer, there's a pretty good chance that the external uterus would be
Yeah,
in trials.
that's another thing too.
No, I mean, I don't think we're good. Like the risk involved.
Artificial wombs, right?
Like the FDA.
But at least where you could, you know, I don't know what is what is the full gestation period where you could go, you know, maybe to a quarter of that.
I guess the artificial wombs are for preemies. Right now, that's what. But
So if you could go a little bit back further than cranium to the vaginal canal thing, then once you're on
That's the design frontal lobes.
We probably don't want to stay all those times. This was fun.
Mars? India is probably India's a little better than space. That's where we did our work on our job.
It's good that now I have more questions that I feel more primitive.
Okay, well, great.
Yeah.
Then also feel free to email me contact me. Otherwise, see you at the next.
Here and then listen more because it seems that I have to upgrade myself. Have a great night.
But you need any help? Thanks for coming. Any help? Hope you enjoyed it. Did someone forget like a backpack or yours? Oh yeah, I have every month. Every month until people get tired of it.